Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? All right. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm Brad Hargreaves. I'm the founder and CEO of Common. And I'm here today to tell you a bit about roommates. So 65 million Americans live with roommates. And through understanding this and understanding how it has changed over time, we'll get a better sense of how Americans are living today, how Americans used to live, and what changes are coming in the real estate landscape. Cool. So I'm here to tell you about roommates. Not necessarily my friends from the Middle Ages here, but the way Americans live today, particularly in urban centers. I mentioned there are 65 million Americans living with roommates. That's actually grown by 20% over the last 10 years, which makes it the fastest growing segment of the multifamily housing market in the US. And it's worthwhile asking why this is, and why is this new? And I'll tell you why it's new, and then I'll go around and tell you why it's not actually new. And it's a little bit of a reversion to the mean of the way a lot of people used to live. So the first piece in understanding this changing landscape and what it means for real estate as a whole is to understand a broader demographic trend in marriage. People are getting married way later than they ever have before. They're staying single longer. They're delaying kids. In 1968, 56% of young people, in this case 18 to 31-year-olds, were married and living on their own. By today, that's dropped to less than a quarter of all young people are married and living on their own. There are a lot of young, single people, way more than there used to be. It's impossible to talk about this and to talk about living with roommates without talking about the bifurcation between rents and income. This is a trend that a lot of people talk about today. You see more and more urban centers introducing rent control. There was just a bill introduced in the Illinois State Assembly, I believe, earlier this week to repeal the state's ban on rent control. So this is a very, very hot conversation right now, and it all comes down to this, which is the bifurcation. Rents have been going up ever since after World War II. Rents have been going up faster than incomes, and that's only accelerated since 2000. And in fact, in the first decade of this millennium, rents increased by 12% nationally, but incomes fell by 7%. And when we look at deals, and people here who are developers, who here is a developer? And who of you developers underwrites rent increases of 2 to 3% per year ad infinitum when you were doing your underwriting? Yeah, there we go. So, everyone is still assuming that this is going to continue. But you look at urban centers, and Miami is a little bit of an exception, but you look at urban centers like New York, DC, LA, San Francisco, where they're doing exactly this. People are already paying 55 to 60% of their take-home income on rent. Huge. Where's that going to go? It's going to go to 70%, 80%? Something's got to break here. One thing that's been compounding this is that the rate at which young people are moving out to the suburbs, so are leaving cities and are going to the suburbs where there's traditionally cheaper housing, more abundant housing, more family-oriented housing, has dropped by 40% in the past 20 years. Young people are staying in cities longer. And the net result of all of this, and this is New York City data, but it's mirrored in a number of other major urban hubs in the United States, including Miami, is the percent of single people living alone, roommates together adds up to a majority of all household units in urban centers. Nuclear families, 18% of all New York City households. That's all 5 boroughs. 18% are traditional nuclear families. A majority, 56%, it's a 2011 study, are either roommates or single people living alone. So at Common, we're designing and operating housing for the roommate generation. This group that has been sort of left behind in some respects by the housing market. But in doing that, we actually ended up tackling a much broader audience and tapping into a bigger need than we ever anticipated doing. Let's take a step back, talk about how we got here. I didn't get my start in real estate. I actually when I started Common 3 years ago, knew next to nothing about real estate. I built my career in education and technology. I started a school called General Assembly during the last recession, teaching underemployed young Americans skills in technology, web development, user experience design, digital marketing, product management, data science, things that were highly in demand in the workforce, but really inaccessible because they weren't taught in universities. There weren't really great grad school programs teaching these topics. So we started a trade school doing this. It's called General Assembly. It became the largest trade school in the US. Today we have 20 brick and mortar campuses, and about 30,000 students a year go through our programs. So actually my background's much more on the product side. But we saw a real need. It's not just our students. You know, our students were 25, 26, they lived with roommates. You know, it wasn't just our students. It was our instructors, our employees, people making $80,000, $100,000, $120,000 a year would move to an urban center and they wouldn't look for an apartment. They would go onto Craigslist and look for a roommate. They'd look for a room. We saw this again and again and again, and we saw something broken in the housing market between what people were looking for and what was being offered and what was being built. So we started Common, really 3 value propositions: convenience, community, and flexibility. And the way to think about all these together is keeping the good parts of living with roommates, the social environment and the affordability, but getting rid of as many of the annoyances as we can control by doing things like furnishing the units, cleaning the shared spaces, providing the toilet paper and paper towels, and taking care of all those little annoyances, whether it's through operations, through design, or through technology, that we can solve to make the roommate experience not just a livable one, not just a survivable one, but a great one. I've told you all how everything's changing and how the world is totally different. Now I'm going to tell you why it's not. Well, better returns too. Developers actually end up making more money by doing this. I'm going to tell you actually why this is not new. And the key to understanding why it's not new is to actually look back farther in history before most of us were born. When a lot of us think about the history of housing in the United States, a lot of it starts at the end of World War II, with white flight, with suburbanization, with redlining. But actually, there was an incredible history of housing in the United States, particularly in urban America, prior to World War II. This is the Hyde Park Hotel in Chicago, or was the Hyde Park Hotel in Chicago. The Hyde Park Hotel was not a tourist hotel. The Hyde Park Hotel was a residential hotel. It was not serving transients, it was not serving tourists, it was serving permanent residents. It's estimated that in the first half of the 20th century, half of all urban dwellers at some point spent at least a year in a residential hotel. These were a key part of urban housing stock and how urban housing stock was able to stay affordable. The residential hotel, some may be familiar with some of the modern legacies of it, boarding houses, SROs, things like that, commonly associated with housing of last resort, housing for the poorest of the poor. It wasn't always like that. The Hyde Park Hotel was a middle-class residential hotel designed for families. It had 2 to 5 room suites. This is the layout of a different hotel in San Francisco, designed for single, mostly young people, primarily women, living alone. Big rooms, all private bathrooms. One thing you don't notice here, which most residential hotels did not have, is private kitchens. Nobody cooked for themselves in a residential hotel. You ate in dining halls. All hotels had these big dining halls downstairs. Probably the best cultural analogy that you may be familiar with. You ever watched Westwood or an old Western, and where do they all live? They live above the saloon, right? In these hotel rooms. But they stay there for a long time. They're not just in for a couple of nights. Deadwood is what I meant. They live there. They live above the saloon. The saloon being a dining hall of a residential hotel. Now, these dining halls were actually staples of American democracy. There were where a lot of great political conversations happened, where a lot of artists became known. And give you an example. When American hotels started rolling out room service in the 1920s, the permanent residents revolted because room service was seen as a European thing. It's isolating. It separates people. They can eat alone in their rooms. That's terrible. We're Americans. We eat together in a big dining hall downstairs. Then the Great Depression happened, World War II happened, white flight happened, all went away. Urban cores decayed, residential hotels were shut down, they were largely outlawed in most major East Coast cities, most Midwestern cities, some on the West Coast remain, but they largely went away. Look at this picture. Look at this one. This is We Live in New York City. It's a modern co-living development. It's not ours, it's different companies. But they have a dining hall. Tiny, sort of useless kitchenettes in the units. Have to be there by code. But people eat together in dining halls, in shared spaces. People can stay for a short period of time, but a lot of them stay for a long period of time. This is a typology in urban housing that has not existed in this form for decades. It's existed as SROs, sure, as some very housing of last resort, which has actually become an increasingly critical part of keeping people off the streets, not being homeless. But this kind of middle class urban housing offering is really new, resurgent. A lot of people look at this and they think about this and like, oh, it's dorms for adults. In some ways it is. You're talking about big layouts, lots of bedrooms around shared central space, or micro units in some cases around kind of central common areas. But the design is elevated. We made a really big point that we didn't want common to feel institutional. We didn't want it to feel like you were living in a dorm or a prison. We wanted it to be a permanent home. We wanted it to feel traditional. When you walked in, like any other apartment building that someone could live for years. And our renewal rate on 12-month leases, which pretty much everyone signs, is actually north of 50%. So we've been able to create those permanent communities now across 20 buildings that we have under management in 5 cities. This is a living area in one of our buildings in DC. You know, there's furniture that you could see in your living room, your parents' living room. It's a bedroom. Another one in DC. So it's creating an elevated experience. Our median age is 30. Our median income is about $80,000 a year. So these aren't 23-year-olds coming straight out of college wanting IKEA furniture. They're people looking for a nicer, better experience. That is a major segment of the urban housing market. I mentioned a little bit of the growth. We're very supply constrained. We're opening up about 15 buildings through the second half of this year, growing to about 1,100 members in 6 cities. And you see some of the stats. We get over 1,000 applications from potential member tenants every single week. And our renewal rate on one-year leases is about 70%. So we've been able to take this model and create permanent, high-demand communities across a number of urban centers in the United States. And one of the clear reasons why this is happening, the community is great, the social environment is incredible, the convenience is there, but it is fundamentally about affordability. We're able to offer about a 20 to 30% discount all into a comparable studio in a similar submarket in the metros we're in, while at the same time generating a 100 to 200 basis point higher cash-on-cash yield for the real estate developer. And it all comes down to a simple equation of people sacrificing some private space for access to better and nicer shared space, community, and a more affordable product than they would be able to get otherwise in a comparable building. This is a sample unit layout. This is a 5-bedroom unit. You see each bedroom opens up into a shared space. We have some bedrooms with private bathrooms, some bedrooms with shared bathrooms. The shared bathrooms come at a pretty steep discount. But shared kitchens, people spend what, 3% of their time in the kitchen? A lot of the people who live at Common don't cook. The kitchen is one of the most expensive things to build. if you can decrease the number of kitchens, you can have a meaningful impact on affordability. People are willing to sacrifice that access to a private kitchen for that savings of $300, $400, $500 per month in rent. We're a big believer in distributed small community spaces. We've seen that creating small, tight communities where everyone knows each other is the best opportunity to foster genuine community and long-term stay. We have a pajama rule, we call it, which is if someone doesn't feel comfortable going into a common area in their pajamas, not putting on makeup, what have you, they don't really feel like it's theirs. They don't feel like they're part of the group there. They don't feel they can be comfortable and at ease in that community space. So creating these, say 300 to 500 square foot community spaces on floors, on every other floor, is a critical part of the common experience. We do ground up, easier to optimize floor plans, but we also do adaptive reuse. This is one project that I'm really excited about that we're opening next year. I haven't really talked publicly about this very much, but we are adapting the old St. Michael's Hospital in partnership with a developer in the city of Newark, New Jersey, and bringing about 100 beds online next year. We're a management company. We partner with developers on design, on development, and mostly on operations, and occasionally co-invest with those developers as well in projects. So I'm acting as not just an advisor, but as an operating partner and a financial partner in these projects. So really excited about this one in particular. It's a reuse of a great old beautiful building in a historic neighborhood. So told you a little bit about what we're doing, what we've seen. Let's talk a bit about where it's headed, because I think this isn't just about what we're doing at Common. This is a broader trend that impacts a number of different aspects of the real estate industry. One is a lot of people assume that this is just an urban trend. And a lot of the demographic traits and characteristics that underlie this are fundamentally urban. Talking about people staying in cities longer, people getting married later, those are urban trends. But this is an example of one of my favorite projects. It's about 45-minute drive outside Atlanta. It's called Serenbe, and it's an intergenerational community with a real urban core that they built. There's rental product, there's sale product, and they were able to really, through the roots of new urbanism, create a true community and a true multi-generational experience. I'm a big advocate for multi-generational living, and I think they did a tremendous job with this project in a totally not urban area. It's very exurban. They built this from dirt. So I'm a big advocate of what they're doing, and I think there's opportunities to create communities that generate higher real estate returns, borrowing a little bit from what we're doing at Common, what other groups are doing like We Live, but also borrowing from America's great tradition of collaborative and community housing. One of the projects we studied when we were researching Common were the co-housing communities that have existed for decades in places like California and Arizona. Communities like Arcosanti and Milagro that have kind of that true multi-generational aspect. This is another one of my favorites. A lot of you may recognize this. This is Rome, which is a destination co-living company. That's their Bali location, but they actually have a beautiful anchor here in Miami. They took over part of the Miami River Inn that was renovated in an incredible way by Avra Jain. This is their Bali location. Unlike Common, they tend to favor digital nomads, people staying there a day, a week, a month, doing remote work, freelancers. More and more people are untethered from a given location and can do their jobs from anywhere. There's a company called Remote Year that is doing this on an even bigger scale. Without owning the real estate, they are able to create these month-long communities in a select set of international locations. So you're seeing more destination co-living, people coming for the same reasons, for sharing, for community, for convenience, but ultimately looking to live in Bali, not in New York, San Francisco, London, DC, the places where we are or where we're going. And you see this finally being embraced by not just cutting-edge startups, but Marriott actually a few months ago announced a shared layout hotel floor plan, where actually very, very small rooms open up into shared living areas with a lot of the features, such as the television that have traditionally been in the room, are actually in small shared spaces shared by a number of guests. So you're seeing more and more developers, more operators, more types of use look at these sharing models as a way to achieve affordability and create social environments, in-person social environments in their products. I wanted to also touch on a project that I'm very excited about that we announced a few weeks ago. This is right in the central business district of New Orleans, on the corner of St. Charles and St. Joseph. It's being done in partnership with Wisnia, a great local developer there, and with the city of New Orleans. And it's the first ever affordable co-living project. We worked with the city to set rents and fix them for 15 years at 75% of AMI, creating an option for the tens of thousands of service workers living in downtown New Orleans who aren't able to afford the new build studio and luxury product that's coming on the market today that's within transit or walking distance of their jobs. So creating a product that they can ride the trolley to, that they can walk to from their jobs in restaurants, in the casinos, in the hotels, so they don't have to bring a car in every day and waste an hour of their life in transit. Very excited about that. It's about 210 beds opening at the end of 2019. So I'm really excited to be able to share these things with you. I wanted to run you through a few projects that I'm very excited about and talk to you a little bit about where I think this is going. So I'm happy to take a couple of questions. I hope we have time. One right there. Yeah, a question is whether we're coming to Miami. You know, I'm taking advantage of this trip to meet with some great developers. So hopefully we'll have something to announce soon. I think Miami's a great city. You know, Miami is really special in that it's not there's not a housing crisis per se. I mean, you can go and find a relatively affordable unit. It's somewhat like Chicago in that way, but there is a real need for community. And you see so many people, I think, more interested in community here and in the community and social aspects of what we're doing than any other city I've been in. And you have a really rising cultural startup scene and a freelancer scene here too that I think would make a model like this really work tremendously well. So we're looking at it.
Two questions. Do you consider sort of an aging demographic in your book here?
Yeah, so the two questions. The first is about capital markets perception of this. This is something we've really gone out of our way to do, and we actually just got our first co-living building, 100% co-living building done with agency finance, with a Fannie deal. So it's actually, they're starting to come around, and we've done permanent financing with a number of lenders, from Deutsche Bank to First Republic to Popular to Signature. So the banks actually are really on board with it. You know, us doing 12-month leases helps a lot. From a bank's perspective, it looks like a traditional building with bigger units where people are, you know, just roommates are sharing them. But we do the same credit checks, you know, verify the income, everything a normal property manager would do. So we've been able to get a lot of banks over the hump. A lot of my time is spent on the equity side. And you know, we have a handful of LPs that like to follow us around and do our deals. So we got about 8 deals done last year with LP capital we brought to the table. And second one, what was the second one? Whenever someone asks 2 questions, I always forget the second one.
Have you guys analyzed the aging demographic?
Oh, aging demographic. Yeah, so we did a research project on the senior living market, because I think we get a lot of interest in this, a lot of inquiries. Ultimately, my strong belief is the shared kitchen model would be very difficult for them. And we didn't see a lot of demand for sharing a kitchen, which that's a pretty central part to co-living as it exists for our current market. And to be clear, we serve people all the way from you know, 18, we have people in their 50s and 60s who live in common, but you know, the peak is really early 30s. And I think if we had a more micro unit or small studio product with shared space, that would be more interesting as a senior living product. So we're actively looking at that. There's a question over here. It's a really, the question is about parking. How do we think about parking spots really per bed? because you're correct. Most municipalities think about parking on a per unit basis, not a per bed basis. So we rarely have parking requirement problems because we have very large units. So it really comes down to what's our projection of car ownership. In most of the cities we're in today, more or less nobody owns a car. So in DC, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, under 20% of our members own cars. So it's not a major issue. But as we go into Miami, as we go into other cities that are more car dependent, or submarkets that are farther away from transit, it's something we're actively looking very hard at, and we have to do effectively bespoke research in the places we're going into. We usually don't do one-to-one bedroom to car. Usually the worst we've done is kind of 0.5 to kind of 0.6, 0.7. Brian, is that if one of our directors in the room on the real estate side, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, that's right.
Why did you choose a leasing model?
You mean with our, why do we have leases with our tenants instead of license agreements or membership agreements?
Yeah.
If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So we could make it a license agreement. We could make it a membership agreement. Would that stand up in a housing court? Probably not. So we decided to go with a lease route. If you're using a membership agreement model, it would probably be more difficult to get, Fannie to do your deal. There's also, the question of, the PR impact of that. We don't want to be seen as using an innovative model to skirt tenant protection rules. So we have to be careful about that. But thank you, it's a good question. Oh, the interpersonal. It's we really rarely intervene, and the job of the services we provide, the cleaning, the supplies, is to remove the surface area of conflict, or to reduce it as much as we can. We do let members transfer within Common if they really don't like their roommates. Thank you. I think
we just have one more question, and
okay.
That's we're done.
Yeah, so the question is, how do we deal with kind of different local code, and particularly in Miami, cities discouraging developers from building lots of small units? Remember that these are actually really large units. That the bedrooms are small, but the units themselves are quite large, generally between 1,000 and 1,600 square feet. So some developers build blends of kind of studios and co-living is a model we see a lot. And we ultimately work with local electeds in every jurisdiction we go into. It's really important for us to build those strong relationships. Thank all of you. I really appreciate being here. I hope you were able to get some fun things out of that. And thank you to the whole Lab Ventures team for having me here.
Thank you so much, Brad. I really appreciate it. Great information. Again, a round of applause. Almost poked with a face.